Hello, it's Doug from Behind Closed Doors, and today I'm going to be looking at what am I looking at today? Fathers for Justice on Russia Today, the 28th of the 12th, 2013. So let's get into the video. What are we waiting for?
Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world, with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
200 children lose contact with their fathers every day in secret courts in this country, where nearly 4 million children are fatherless. 1 in 3 children live without their father. £44 billion is the cost of family breakdown every year.
Just to stop him right there, at that time it was 44. It's now gone up to I think 50 or 51, 52. Family breakdown rises by £1 billion every year.
50% of children in the UK will have seen their parents divorce by the time they are 16. 1 in 3 children will lose contact with their father permanently. 70% of young offenders come from lone parent families. In many parts of the UK, the majority of children are fatherless. In London, Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham and Leeds, over 50% of children live in fatherless families. Fathers for Justice have scaled the battlement.
Let's just let those statistics settle in a little bit, because I don't think he's making them up, and from what I've read and what I've seen, it's about right. I mean, you can read different statistics and they say different things, but it sounds about right. And just think for a minute, is that a problem in the system, or is the system functioning correctly and that's how the government would like things to be?
Fathers for Justice have scaled the battlements of even Buckingham Palace in the early days in their Batman suits to draw attention to the elephant in the corner of the room, which the political class and their media echo chamber hope you won't notice. Children need fathers. And if the father and mother have to split up, then shared parenting is the best solution. We are joined by the happily enjoined married couple, Matt and Nadine O'Connor, who founded Fathers for Justice 12 years ago this month, and who are the most redoubtable campaigners in the land. Welcome to both of you.
Hi, George.
These statistics are simply astounding. In these great cities of England, half of the children are living in fatherless families, and yet the justice system is failing them. Tell us.
Well, as you've rightly pointed out in your introduction there, George, that this is a major social catastrophe. It's unfolding before us, and yet our political...
I don't think it's a catastrophe, you see. I think it's a planned destruction of the family home.
class are doing absolutely nothing about it to address this problem. We live in a country where it is easier to father somebody else's children rather than your own. And what we've been trying to do since I started the campaign 12 years ago is to raise awareness of this issue. We have tried direct action, we have tried political engagement, but what we found is the people in Parliament do not want to speak to Fathers for Justice. They would rather speak to the Taliban than speak to us about this major social issue.
Nadine, was it the sight of Matt in a Batman suit that first attracted you to him?
I just want to stop it right there, because a lot of people claim to be Batman, but I am really Batman. Here is me in a Batman suit. I know, I look amazing. Also, just in case I get pulled over by the police, here is my driving licence. I am Batman, so when I tell you that I am Batman, I'm really Batman. When Fathers for Justice were like going on Buckingham Palace dressed as Batman and all that kind of stuff, it was, at the time, I thought it was, oh, they're just unhappy that things didn't go their way. You know, until you have children and you've gone through the family court and you realise the injustice and the child abuse that exists behind closed doors, welcome to the YouTube channel, then you begin to realise that, oh shit, this is really bad child abuse. And I used to think that Fathers for Justice meant that it's fathers wanting something that they didn't get. But when you get right into it, the way I would frame it is like parents for justice or family for justice, because it's not just fathers, it's mothers that are affected by the family courts as well. It's the grandparents. When you have a perpetrator of coercive controlling behaviour that the police will not identify because it's being dealt with in a family court, and so the crime is then allowed to continue. It's a really bad situation. It's so many people in a family that are affected by children being essentially kidnapped by one parent.
Actually, I can honestly say, George, no. But I was at a Fathers for Justice meeting. I'd been going through the family courts, and a girlfriend of mine said, you know, your case sounds very similar to that of many fathers. Why don't you go to Fathers for Justice and ask them some questions, get some help and advice? And I did. I went along to a meeting, and that's where I met Matt.
Nadine, the point that you make implicitly is that this is a problem affecting both men and women as well as children. The assumption is in the justice system, I can tell you as a legislator, as the Americans put my job, that nobody's really listening. I've been trying through motions on the order paper and public meetings in the Parliament, as you well know, to interest more parliamentarians in this.
Yeah, I just want to point out the fact that George Galloway has done a lot of work on this, and I really appreciate Gorgeous George for doing everything that he's done. And it's essentially, when you look at all these people, whether it's lower or upper class, it's the working person that is working for children's rights. The government don't care.
Why are they so unmoved by these astounding statistics?
Like the Fathers for Justice people is very much a grassroots movement. The feminists were heavily funded by major companies from the top down. So feminism is the planned destruction of the family home, and then the grassroots Fathers for Justice people are kind of like trying to combat it, but it's like a David against a Goliath.
And the £44 billion price tag. You'd think that alone would attract the politicians.
Well, you've kind of got the answer there. It's not necessarily the price tag, but it's the money that the family court justice system also generates. I mean, I have a strong belief that while it's costing a lot of money, I think that it's actually helping the economy in this country at the moment. And family breakdown, as a direct result, will create sort of two of everything. If you split up, you both can't take the freezer, so you have to get another freezer.
This is what I've been saying for years, and I'm glad that Nadine has pointed this out. And obviously, this was done years ago, so she's pointed it out before I did. But this is, after looking at everything, I was like, why do they allow this? Because, just financially, it would help the economy. And when you look into it, the UK doesn't really make anything anymore. A majority of the jobs have been exported. So we're a service industry country. So there's a lot of job creation, and it's really good for the economy when you break up families. So even though there's £50 billion that it costs on one hand, on the other hand, it's creating a lot more money. I agree with Nadine here. Breaking up families is really good for the economy.
Are in the new house, so everything gets multiplied. So actually I think that it generates a lot of money for this country. The family law industry, the solicitors, the barristers, everybody is making an awful lot of money out of this.
And it's secret courts. This is something, you see, on the face of it, you would want these things to remain private because you don't want to expose children to...
Yeah, I mean, privacy is a thing that used to be valid before Facebook. All this social media and stuff, and people kind of now hand over all their details to these companies. Privacy was a thing held in high regard. People liked their anonymity. And now it's encouraged the opposite way with the way that technology is going to give away your information and your personal details and your private life online and make it publicly accessible. And so one of the ways in which they say, the reason why it's private is to protect the individual, but mostly to protect children. But the trouble is, when you've got child abuse that's happening, it's not protecting children, it's hurting children, and it's keeping it private so that you can't talk about it publicly.
Schoolyard ridicule and so on. But in secret courts, anything can happen by definition.
And it does. I mean, we've had several cases going on in the press at the moment where a father's been in court for 12 years trying to get contact with his daughter. Now, I mean, 12 years is nearly the child's lifetime. I mean, it's completely unacceptable. The statistics that you talk about at the beginning, they're not statistics that we should be proud of in this country. It's absolutely disgusting that we're...
I use that word all the time. It's disgusting because you're monetizing relationships. And it's like when you break down a company, it's worth more than the individual parts are worth more than the company as a whole. Like when you look at, how certain businesses function, and that's how it works, is that, well, it's broken down. People are worth money, and they're broken down into their individual counterparts. There's really no one to advocate for children, and a lot of the children's charities are run by feminists and people that want to make a huge amount of money. So their motivations aren't necessarily helping children. Their motivations are on making profit for their non-profit organisation.
It's absolutely disgusting that we're still sitting here 12, 13 years after the start of our campaign talking to you about this. You would think that, as you say, nobody wants to discuss their dirty linen in private. That is a private matter, but the secrecy of the courts does allow parents to pit themselves against each other. It does allow the industry to carry on, and then
it's not just that it allows the parents to pit themselves against each other. It's criminal what's going on in the family courts. It's criminal, but the reason why the perpetrators get away with it, because again, it's made out like, oh, you're both as bad as each other, you're both, why can't you learn to get on? It only takes one person to be hitting the other person. It looks like it's that, but it's not. The conflict is just one person hitting the other. And I think that's a big misconception, is that criminal acts are being committed in the family court because the police will just turn around and say, it's being dealt with in family court. It's a civil issue. So the perpetrators are allowed to get away with their crimes and they won't be investigated.
it does allow the industry to carry on, and then there's no accountability.
That's the thing, is that when you have responsibility, parental responsibility, and the court overtake your parental responsibility, they need to be accountable for that responsibility.
The most important thing here is that we have an unelected, unaccountable, unsackable judiciary operating in complete secrecy.
Yeah, it's for the best interests and the welfare of the child. Well, who gets to decide that? Oh, I do. Oh, who are you? Oh, shh, it's secret. It's a secret court. It's disgusting.
Complete secrecy that refuses, in the case of the father that's been discussed recently, who's been going to the court for 12 years, has 100 court appearances. Not one of those court orders has been enforced. They are not worth the paper they're printed on. Yet we will send mothers to prison for not sending little Johnny to go to school. We will fine motorists for going 4 miles an hour over the speed limit, but we will do nothing when it comes to ensuring the rights of children to see their fathers are protected. And there's more legislation protecting dogs in this country than there is the relationship, the sacred bond between children and their fathers.
Just let that sink in a little bit. He's right.
I've got 3 boys, and I want my children to be judged not on the basis of their gender, but on the content of their character. What sort of society are we creating when boys grow up in fatherless families with all the consequences that flow from that?
70% of young offenders.
Absolutely, the highest rate of young offending in Western Europe.
Most children.
But you see, that's the thing, is that generational violence, again, it keeps the police busy, doesn't it? Oh, we need to recruit. Domestic violence is on the increase. We need to recruit more police. It's a funding issue. What I would ask yourself is, do you really think that this is, the system isn't perfect and this is just part of the fact that things are a bit imperfect? Or do you think that, having listened to all these stats here, that this is systematic child abuse that's being covered up? Because that's what I believe.
Most children who are harmed in domestic settings. Most children who are harmed in domestic settings are harmed by their mother's new boyfriend.
Yeah, who never gets checked.
The mother's new boyfriend is never vetted by anybody. No. He can be literally anybody. You could have a long litter of convictions of all kinds behind.
And the boyfriend might change week to week. Who knows?
Him, but he can move in to the mother's life and therefore your children's life, and no one will ever ask him a single question, at least until it's too late. Whilst the father has to go through hoops to get a court order, to get contact with his child.
I hate that word, contact. Again, it's another disgusting word.
Contact, what a word.
Terrible.
With your own child. Because you broke up from your child's mother, you have to apply for contact with your own children.
And then you have to prove you're worthy of it. That's
you have to prove you're worthy of it.
The week before, you were perfectly okay. You were doing the school run, you're doing dinner, taking them swimming, everything. And then the day after that you separate, you have to prove you're worthy.
Because they always assume this of the father's role, that he's the one who walks up.
Yeah, but they've also assumed.
Well, that's not true. yeah, you see what this lady's just saying there, that's not true. Like, the father's not walking out. What happens is, that's why domestic abuse is such a big thing, because it's the easiest way to get the guy out the house. This is what usually happens when a couple are broken up and still living together. One of them leaves the property. So what the mothers are doing is, they've got one of three choices. They can mediate to sort out who's going to live where and how, and just be amicable. That's one option. The second option is to cry wolf and domestic abuse, and they can do that using non-molestation orders, as I've talked about in other videos, and that gets the man out the property so that she remains in the property with the children. But another way that they can do it, the way that Women's Aid and Refuge and all those other female institutions help out, is by empowering the woman to say, I'm going to leave and I'm going to take the children with me, because the power and control and the money is in the children, and they need the children to fund their new lifestyle. And they need the children to fund their new lifestyle. It's absolutely, say it with me, disgusting. The incentives are set up by society to encourage the mother to cry wolf.
Yeah, but they've also assumed there's actually brought in a presumption where every father poses a risk to his child, because every father is now risk assessed. Regardless, you are risk assessed. When you go into the court system, CAFCASS will risk assess you using soft evidence, which is allegations, and hard evidence, which is anything relating to police and police reports.
And when CAFCASS assess you, their assessment criteria is sexist. CAFCASS decide the future of children, and it's sexist. And that's why the family court is so criminal, because it looks at sex instead of behaviour. But the CAFCASS people have nothing to identify female perpetrators. Their framework only identifies male perpetrators. Therefore, female perpetrators are not allowed to be identified.
So you are assumed by this government, by this country, by the state, to be a risk to your children, even though days or a week earlier you were safely at home looking after them.
And that's where we come back to the secret court thing, because you say, if you make an allegation against somebody...
And I think this is important for people that haven't been through the family court to realise there's two things. One is that you don't have a right to see your children, which is why the government can make orders to take them off of you. They say that it's the child's right to see you. So you don't have a right to see your children. And also, nothing needs to happen in order for your children to be taken away from you. There just has to be concerns about what may happen. So you're in a very vulnerable position as a parent. You still have PR, parental responsibility, but that's in terms of cost and schooling and all that kind of stuff, and who's on the birth certificate. But don't think that you're entitled to see your own child, because you're not. So the children are essentially government property.
And that's where we come back to the secret court thing, because you say, if you make an allegation against somebody in a criminal court, you have to prove that allegation's true. You have to provide the evidence. In a family court, you have to provide no evidence whatsoever. They can simply act on your word.
Like I say, that is true. You don't need to do anything. You don't have to say, oh, this happened. All you have to say is, this may happen. And because I have concerns that this may happen, then you're going to have to stop contact.
It's like a Salem-style witch hunt. I point a finger at you. Yeah. You're guilty.
You and I...
This whole thing about pitting mothers and fathers against each other because it's profitable is really bad. So do you see that, like, the reason why the government don't want shared parenting is because it would reduce the amount of conflict and reduce the amount of jobs. They don't care about you. They don't care about your children. They don't care about your family. They just care about making money for the economy.
Guilty.
You and I are married. We split up. You don't want me to have any role in the children's life, so you have an incentive to say bad things about me. Bad things which in a secret court will be implicitly believed unless I can really go the extra mile to disprove them.
Yeah, and what's the best way of me punishing you?
So like in the criminal court, it's innocent until proven guilty. In a family court, it's guilty until proven innocent. It's the other way around. And instead of beyond reasonable doubt this happened, it's a bounce of probability that it could happen. So they're two major things that are important to consider. That's why it's really a secret court. That's why nobody really wants to talk about the conversation.
What's my motivation? If I want to punish you for whatever the reason is to deny you access to the people you love and care about.
Yeah, that's called coercive controlling behaviour. It's a criminal act, and mothers and fathers are getting away with it.
And that's the motivating factor. We know full well that men would do it to women given the opportunity.
Yeah.
But the law itself is very cleverly drafted. It doesn't discriminate in the legislation, but what it does do is discriminate in the application of the law. And
See, I don't think men would. I think men are a lot more reasonable. He's probably saying that to be a bit politically correct and to sound fair-handed. But I think it is predominantly a female crime in the same way that rape is predominantly a male crime. And I've said this before as well, and I'll go into this much more in depth in another video, is that everybody experiences aggression for whatever reason the reason may be. Somebody that's masculine, and I'm going to use the word masculine and feminine here because that can both apply to men and women. So the masculine is physical, so it's shouting, screaming, hitting things. And the feminine is more reputation destruction. And so the masculine way of being aggressive is like a big ship. You can see it coming from a mile away. And the feminine way of being aggressive, reputation destruction, is very much like a submarine. So the masculine is like a battleship and the feminine way is a submarine. So in terms of like above and below the water, what you can and can't see. So you could look out into the sea and see this little telescope come up and go, oh, what's that? But it's like a submarine. It's got nuclear missiles in it, but it's not identified because it's below the surface. And that's what reputation destruction is. That's what the family courts specialise in. Now, obviously, everybody's different, and you get some women that are physically violent, and you also get some men that are more feminine in their aggression and they destroy somebody's reputation. But they're two kind of like gender ways of dealing with aggression. And depending on what stats you look at, it's about 50-50. Sometimes it's 60-40. It's about half each in terms of like male and female aggression.
Itself is very cleverly drafted. It doesn't discriminate in the legislation, but what it does do is discriminate in the application of the law. And the thing that makes a mockery of it, as I've said already, is the fact that the court orders, which are written, are absolutely worthless.
Well,
you can spend tens of thousands of pounds, as many people have done.
They're worthless because you can't enforce them, and there's no punishment for the perpetrator of parental alienation.
And you have got nothing to show for it at the end of it.
Well, I know some people, who have spent tens of thousands of pounds in court, employing barristers, winning the case, getting an order, and then, as you said earlier, the other parent simply refuses to implement the order, and nothing happens to them.
No.
How can that be?
Well, it's completely wrong. The judges wash their hands of it. I mean, we've seen this case recently of this.
Because the judges aren't accountable, the magistrates aren't accountable. The solicitors don't act in the best interest of a child, they act in the best interest of their client. So nobody's accountable, which is why they can commit their crimes in their own little private family court.
This father who spent 12 years going through the court system, and the judges go, well, there's nothing we can do. Really? You enforce the law, you send mothers to prison over not sending kids to school, you give fines to motorists for going 4 miles an hour over the speed limit. You can simply transfer residence from one parent to the other if you're faced with a parent who is recalcitrant, who is failing to uphold that child's rights to see both parents. And what we do, what we present as a team of Fathers to Justice is, you know, it's not just about men versus women. We're a team because we've been through it. Both of us have been through it. We've seen it from both sides.
It's about who's got reasonable and unreasonable behaviour. And this is why shared parenting should really be enforced, but it's not because of housing.
We've seen how family law fails children repeatedly. So for us, what we're trying to do as a campaign, Gayatri, is to get men and women to come together and say, hey, look, this is such a serious social issue. We're failing our children.
Well, that's the point. It's not that fathers have a right to see their children, though, in my view, they do.
Yeah,
the real issue is that the child has the right to see its father and be with its father, not in a contact, fleeting.
But the child doesn't get to decide that. The feminists that run the family courts do.
Easily withdrawn, timed, with the mother standing at the door
or
with the
based
watch.
on money.
Well,
If you don't pay any maintenance, you don't see the child. Sometimes it's a straight trade.
It's a ransom, yeah. So like the more you aren't allowed to see your children, the more child maintenance you have to pay. And the child maintenance is taken off your gross income, so it's before you even pay tax. Now, also contact centres can be between, say, £30 and £60 an hour. That's about an average, yeah? So you're paying £60 an hour to see your child. That's the ransom. So there's two expenses. There's the contact, which is £60 an hour, plus there's a child maintenance for not seeing them. So what they've essentially done is they've taken your children away from you, and ordinarily, if somebody kidnaps somebody, they ask for a ransom. Well, not only did they ask for the ransom to be released, you've also got to pay for the fact that they took them off you. That's the child maintenance. It's disgusting. Whereas if you had shared parenting and it was set up correctly, then nobody would need to pay child maintenance. But the child maintenance needs to be paid because it's a parent tax. And depending on how many children you have, it can be up to like 20% once you include the fees that they put on top of it for taking out your account, because they charge you for the privilege of taking the money off your gross income. So there's a huge amount of incentive for the resident parent, stereotypically the mother, but fathers do it too, in order to keep the child at ransom.
Not in a contact, fleeting, easily withdrawn, timed, with the mother standing at the door
Or,
with
of course,
the
based
watch.
on money.
Well,
If you don't pay any maintenance, you don't see the child. Sometimes it's a straight trade. Fathers are simply cash points in most cases.
And spurback, we're cash points, we're spurbacks. These aren't contact orders, these are control orders. I mean, they are control orders. They control you. I mean, men are often accused of being controlling. Well, I can tell you, there's nothing more controlling than the court telling you when you can and can't see your children.
That's what I'm saying, and coercive controlling behaviour is a crime at the behest of your ex-partner, and that's what the family courts give orders out for.
You can and can't see your children.
Oh.
Or to have you put in a contact centre for 2 hours on a Saturday to see your children, unless you've posed some kind of serious risk to your children, no father should be put in a contact centre. Contact, as you've said, is something we used to have of aliens from outer space,
Indeed.
not of our own flesh and blood.
Last word.
It's really disgusting.
Last word to the mother of Fathers for Justice. Nadine, is it likely to get better anytime soon, or are we still on a downward spiral with all this?
No, I don't see it getting better anytime soon. I mean, we had all the promises before the last election. The Conservative Party were going to change the law, we were going to hit the ground running. They failed to implement those promises. And
It doesn't matter which party you vote for, no one's changing it. It's not going to change. Why would they change it? It makes too much money.
And at the moment, the Children and Families Bill that's going through, I think is just a fudge. It's not going to address the real issue. I think the problem's going to get worse. And to be honest, I really don't see this coming back on the proper political agenda until 2020, because I don't think anybody's going to raise it again before then. So,
Well, it's 2021 now, and nothing much has really changed, so it looks like she's right.
I don't want to be here campaigning. Matt doesn't want to be here campaigning. We simply want the law changed. Is it too much?
And do you really want this in the future? Like, I don't want to be able to, because this could easily happen again, because the system is set up for abuse. If my children settle down with anybody that does this to them in the future, the cycle's going to keep repeating. And that's the lie is of the feminists, is that they say, oh, we're after equality, but they're not, because if they were, it would have occurred. But all it's done is create inequality.
Is it too much to ask for equality in today's day and age?
Nadine and Matt O'Connor, Fathers for Justice. Thanks for joining us on the Sputnik.
Thank you.
Coming up after the break.
So yeah, that was a nice interview from the Fathers for Justice people. A great team. They've done so much. The way I see it is that everyone's spinning their wheels in the mud. It's just making a mess everywhere, and the car's not going anywhere. It's like they're putting so much effort into raising awareness and to try and change the law and to make sure that there's equality in parenting. And, after all their hard work and dedication, what has changed? I appreciate them, and I think it's great that they're doing this in the same way that I'm making these videos here. I feel like I'm doing something, but really, is it doing anything? Anyway, hope that video is helpful.